I called my husband 32 times to tell him his mother might not survive the night. He ignored every call while drinking cocktails at a beachfront hotel with another woman. I stayed beside her until the monitors went silent, arranged the funeral alone, and 6 days later left my wedding band on top of the divorce petition before walking out of his life for good. The final call connected at 2:06 a.m. I remember the time because I was standing beneath a flickering light outside the neurological ICU at Westbridge Memorial, watching the call timer move across my screen. A woman answered, half asleep and amused. "Evan, your phone is buzzing again." Then I heard my husband's voice, close enough to her that he did not need to raise it. "Turn it off, Lacey. It can wait." The line went dead. I remained there with the phone against my ear, as if the silence might explain how 9 years of marriage had led to that hallway. Behind the glass doors, Margaret Hale, my mother-in-law and my closest friend, was dying. Her only son was somewhere warm with a woman who knew how he liked to be called in bed, while I held the plastic bag containing his mother's shoes. 43 minutes later, Margaret squeezed my hand once and never moved again. But that was not where the story began. My name is Nora Bennett. For 11 years, I have worked as a forensic accountant, investigating falsified expenses, employee theft, and financial fraud. My job is to notice when a story sounds convincing, but the numbers underneath it do not. People lie with confidence. Receipts do not. Remember that, because before the week was over, my husband's receipts would tell me more truth than he had in our entire marriage. Evan and I had been together for 12 years and married for 9. He was a regional sales director for a company supplying orthopedic equipment to private hospitals. He could remember a surgeon's golf handicap after one dinner, charm an entire room before dessert, and make me feel unreasonable for asking why he had forgotten our anniversary. I used to call that charisma. Now I call it practice. Margaret was 73 and had lived alone since her husband, Robert, died 4 years earlier. Her small blue house stood on Hawthorne Lane, less than 20 minutes from ours. Every Wednesday after work, I visited her. We cooked dinner, complained about television commercials, and argued over whether cinnamon belonged in apple pie. Evan never asked me to go. I went because the first time I met Margaret, she studied me across her kitchen table and said, "Good, someone finally arrived who listens before answering." On my wedding morning, she fastened my necklace and told me I could call her mom whenever I was ready. I was ready immediately. She taught me to make biscuits without measuring, prune roses without pity, and stop apologizing when people were disappointed by boundaries they should never have crossed. She was also the reason I stayed with Evan longer than I should have.
There had been signs during the previous year. Evan began placing his phone face down whenever I entered the room. He changed the passcode he had used since college and claimed it was required by his company's new security policy. He bought new shirts for client meetings, joined a fitness club near the airport instead of the one 2 streets from our house, and occasionally came home smelling like expensive soap from hotels he had supposedly never visited. I noticed everything. That was the problem. I noticed the inconsistencies, then built explanations around them because accepting the obvious truth would have required me to change my entire life. In my work files, that behavior would have been called ignoring material evidence. In my marriage, I called it trust. The Monday before Margaret died, I drove Evan to the airport. He told me he was attending a medical sales summit in Phoenix, where he would be presenting a proposal to one of the company's largest hospital groups. "This could decide my promotion," he said as I pulled up beside the departure's entrance. He leaned over and kissed the side of my face without actually looking at me. "I'll be impossible to reach during the sessions. Don't keep calling unless someone is bleeding." I gave a small laugh. "What qualifies as serious enough?" "You'll know," he said. Then he took his suitcase from the trunk and disappeared through the sliding doors. He was right. I knew. Wednesday evening at 6:27, I was standing in Margaret's kitchen chopping carrots while she stirred a pot of chicken stew. The radio was playing an old song she liked, and rain tapped softly against the window over the sink. She was telling me about Robert's habit of stealing pieces of roasted chicken before dinner and denying it with food still in his mouth. Then, the spoon slipped from her hand. It struck the tile once. I turned and saw her gripping the edge of the counter. One side of her face had gone strangely still. "Nora," she whispered, "something is wrong." Her knees gave way. I reached her before her head hit the floor. I called emergency services with one hand while supporting her neck with the other. The dispatcher asked for her age, address, symptoms, and whether she was breathing. I answered every question clearly, while some distant part of me watched the stew continue to bubble on the stove. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. I rode in the ambulance beside her, holding her cold fingers while a medic attached wires to her chest. "You're not alone, Mom," I kept saying. "I'm right here." That was the only promise I could safely make. At Westbridge Memorial, they rushed her through double doors and sent me to a waiting room filled with gray chairs and outdated magazines. I called Evan at 7:11 p.m. 4 rings. Voicemail. "Evan, your mother collapsed. We are at Westbridge Memorial. Call me immediately." I called again 3 minutes later, then again. By the 6th call, I had also sent 2 messages. "Your mom is in the hospital. The doctors think it may be a brain bleed. Call me now." Both showed as delivered. Neither was answered. I told myself he was presenting. I imagined him standing in a conference room with his phone on silent while executives studied slides behind him. There was still, I insisted, a reasonable explanation. At 8:03, a neurologist named Dr. Priya Shah entered the waiting room and sat across from me. She spoke carefully, without softening anything. Margaret has suffered a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. There is significant bleeding around the brain. She is breathing independently, which is positive, but the location of the rupture makes surgery extremely dangerous. What happens now? We monitor her closely and control her blood pressure. The greatest risk is another rupture. The next several hours are critical. Her son is away on business, I said. He'll come as soon as he knows. I believed that sentence because I had not yet heard the woman answer his phone.
A nurse named Teresa Alvarez led me into Margaret's room shortly after 9. She was in her late 50s, with silver threaded through her dark hair and the steady expression of someone who had spent decades standing beside families on the worst nights of their lives. Before letting me sit down, she opened Margaret's electronic chart. "You're listed as her medical proxy," she said. I looked up. "Me?" "Nora Bennett, signed and notarized 18 months ago. You have authority to make decisions if she cannot." Then I remembered the brown envelope Margaret had pushed toward me one Wednesday evening. She had said, "Keep this somewhere safe." Evan avoids hard decisions, and Melissa turns every crisis into theater. You'll listen to what I actually want. I had laughed and told her she was planning too far ahead. She had answered, "That's what people say right before they need paperwork." Margaret had prepared for this night before any of us knew it was coming. At 9:18, I called Evan for the 9th time. At 9:31, the 10th. At 9:44, the 11th. Every call went to voicemail. I sent another message. "Your mother has a ruptured aneurysm. The doctor says the next few hours are critical. Please call." Nothing. At 10:02, I called Evan's younger sister, Melissa. She answered immediately, sounding annoyed rather than frightened. "What is it?" "Your mother is in intensive care. She has bleeding in her brain." There was a pause. Is she actually dying, or are the doctors just being cautious? I stared through the glass at Margaret's motionless body. She could die tonight. Melissa sighed. The sound was so ordinary that for a moment I wondered whether she had heard me correctly. "Evan told me this week is important for him," she said. "He's been under huge pressure. You can't keep blowing up his phone every time something happens." "Every time something happens?" "You know what I mean. You make everything sound catastrophic." "I'm calling from the neurological ICU." Another pause. "Fine, I'll come tomorrow morning if she hasn't improved." "If she hasn't improved? I have the kids, Nora. I can't just abandon everything." Then she hung up. I stood alone in the corridor holding Margaret's handbag and the plastic bag with her coat and shoes. That was the moment I stopped expecting help from anyone whose last name was Hale. Around midnight, Margaret opened her eyes. They moved slowly across the room until they found me. "There you are," she whispered. I moved closer and took her hand. "I'm here, Mom." Her gaze drifted toward the doorway. "Where's Evan?" The answer came too easily. "His flight was delayed. There's bad weather near Phoenix. He's trying to get back."
I had been covering for my husband so long that I could lie for him without taking a breath. Margaret watched me carefully. Even sick, even frightened, she still had the same sharp eyes that had silenced entire holiday dinners with one look. Then her fingers tightened weakly around mine. "You came," she said. "That matters." It did matter. It was simply not the same thing. She closed her eyes again. I returned to the hallway and kept calling. Call 16, call 19, call 23. By then, something inside me had changed. I was no longer calling because I believed he would answer. I was creating a record. My messages became shorter, calmer, more precise. "It is 12:38 a.m. Your mother regained consciousness and asked for you. Her condition remains critical." At 1:14, I left another. "This is call 27. Please contact the ICU immediately." At 1:46, call 31 went unanswered. At 2:06, I made call 32. This time, someone picked up. "Evan, your phone is buzzing again." The woman sounded relaxed, sleepy, almost amused. Then came my husband's voice. "Turn it off, Lacey. It can wait." The call ended. I did not call again. I did not send an angry message. I opened the call history, took screenshots showing all 32 attempts, and emailed them to both my private account and my work account. Then I saved every voicemail in a separate folder. Evidence first, feelings later. I put the phone in my pocket and walked back into Margaret's room. Teresa looked toward the door behind me. "Is her son coming?" "No," I said. For the first time that night, I told the truth.
At 2:24 a.m., the monitors changed. Television teaches you that death announces itself with screaming alarms and people running in slow motion. In reality, the sound was smaller. A soft, warning tone. A door opening quickly. Teresa calling for Dr. Shaw in a voice that was calm, because panic would not help anyone. The doctor arrived within minutes and studied the screens before ordering another scan. When she returned, she stood at the foot of Margaret's bed and looked directly at me. "There has been a second rupture," she said. "The bleeding is extensive." I already understood. Still, I made her say the rest. "Can you stop it?" "No." "Can surgery help?" "It would not change the outcome."
Margaret's advance directive is very specific. She does not want mechanical ventilation, resuscitation, or extraordinary intervention if there is no reasonable chance of recovery. The room seemed to narrow around us. You're asking me to follow her instructions? Yes. We can keep her comfortable and make sure she feels no pain. Margaret had already made the decision. All I had to do was be strong enough not to betray it. Then follow them, I said. They lowered the lights. Teresa removed the equipment that no longer served a purpose and adjusted the medication that did. I moved my chair to Margaret's right side because arthritis had made her left hand stiff during the past year. I held her fingers between both of mine. I told her the roses in her backyard would survive the storm. I told her I would finish the stew. I told her she had been a better mother to me than anyone had ever managed to be. At 2:49 a.m., her fingers closed around mine once. Not a reflex, not an accident. A single, deliberate squeeze. Then she let go. The room became silent in a way that no room ever fully recovers from. I was the only family member there. Her daughter had decided to wait until morning. Her son had decided that the call could wait. Teresa stayed with me while I signed the first forms. Hospitals reduce death to boxes, signatures, and identification numbers because grief cannot be entered into a database. I signed as medical proxy. I signed as the person responsible for release arrangements. I signed beneath the words relationship to deceased and wrote daughter-in-law, although the phrase suddenly felt far too small. I drove home shortly after 4. The house was dark and perfectly ordinary. Evan's coffee cup was still beside the sink. His shoes were lined up near the door. A jacket he had worn the week before hung over the back of a chair, evidence of a man who still believed he lived there. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise without turning on a light. At 10:17 a.m., my phone finally buzzed. A message from Evan. Sorry, crazy schedule. What happened? I read it once, then again, then enough times that the words stopped looking like language. What happened? I thought about Margaret collapsing into my arms. I thought about the 32 calls. I thought about the woman telling him his phone was buzzing. I typed 4 words. Your mother died tonight. The message showed as read almost immediately. The typing dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. His answer came 48 minutes later.
Oh, God, that's terrible. Flights are completely messed up here. Can you take care of the funeral arrangements? You're better with details. I stared at the screen. Take care of it? As though Margaret's body were a repair appointment. As though her life were another task on the household list he assumed I would finish. I answered with one word. Yes. It was the last helpful thing I ever said to my husband. That afternoon, I met with Samuel Porter, the funeral director Margaret had selected years earlier. Of course she had selected one. Her file contained everything: preferred cemetery, church, hymns, dress, newspaper notice, and a handwritten instruction that read, "No open casket. People should remember me arguing, not lying still." I chose a simple walnut coffin and white lilies. Samuel kept saying, "When your husband arrives, the 2 of you can approve the program." After the 3rd time, I stopped correcting him. Let the documents assume Evan would come. Documents had already begun doing more work in my marriage than he ever had. That evening, I returned to Margaret's house and sat at her kitchen table to write the obituary. The unfinished stew was still inside the refrigerator. Her reading glasses rested beside the sugar bowl. One wrote about her garden, her sharp humor, and the way she remembered every birthday without needing social media to remind her. Then I opened our joint credit card account to pay the funeral deposit. It was an ordinary habit. Check the available balance, confirm recent transactions, make sure there were no duplicate charges. The statement loaded. The first line that caught my attention was not from Phoenix. It was from the Seabrook Cove Resort in Key Largo, Florida. $2,736, 4 nights, ocean view suite. I scrolled down. 2 dinners charged to the room, a private boat excursion for 2, a couples massage, champagne. Evan was not trapped at a medical conference. He had not even flown to Arizona. He was lying beside another woman in Florida while his mother died asking where he was. And he had paid for it with our money.
Samuel kept saying, when your husband arrives, the 2 of you can approve the program. After the 3rd time, I stopped correcting him. Let the documents assume Evan would come. Documents had already begun doing more work in my marriage than he ever had. That evening, I returned to Margaret's house and sat at her kitchen table to write the obituary. The unfinished stew was still inside the refrigerator. Her reading glasses rested beside the sugar bowl. One wrote about her garden, her sharp humor, and the way she remembered every birthday without needing social media to remind her. Then I opened our joint credit card account to pay the funeral deposit. It was an ordinary habit. Check the available balance, confirm recent transactions, make sure there were no duplicate charges. The statement loaded. The first line that caught my attention was not from Phoenix. It was from the Seabrook Cove Resort in Key Largo, Florida. $2,736. 4 nights, ocean view suite. I scrolled down. 2 dinners charged to the room, a private boat excursion for 2, a couple's massage, champagne. Evan was not trapped at a medical conference. He had not even flown to Arizona. He was lying beside another woman in Florida while his mother died asking where he was. And he had paid for it with our money.
I did not feel rage, not yet. What I felt was recognition. It was the same sensation I experienced when reviewing a company's books and finally finding the transaction that made every earlier inconsistency fall into place. The false invoices, the altered dates, the unexplained withdrawals, all of them suddenly became part of one clear design. Evan's story and the numbers had separated. The numbers were telling the truth. I placed the funeral home on hold and examined every charge. Seabrook Cove Resort, $684 per night. Dinner at the resort's private terrace, $193.40. Sunset sailing package for 2, $420. Couples massage, $360. Champagne and chocolate delivery, $178. The champagne was Masson Laurent Reserve, the same bottle I had once pointed out at a restaurant on our 7th anniversary. Evan had looked at the price and laughed. We're not wasting that kind of money on bubbles. Apparently, the bubbles were only wasteful when they were for his wife. I paid the funeral deposit. Then I walked into Margaret's small office, turned on Robert's old printer, and printed the entire credit card statement twice. One copy went into a folder. The other went into a locked drawer. I did not highlight anything, never alter the first copy of evidence. The next morning, while collecting the memorial programs from the print shop, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Evan's company. For one foolish second, I thought he had finally found enough courage to call from an office line. Instead, a cheerful woman introduced herself as Camille Foster, the regional coordinator. "Nora, I'm so sorry about Margaret," she said. "Everyone here loved hearing Evan's stories about her. We want to send flowers. Is the service on Saturday?" "Yes." "And of all the times for this to happen, while he's on vacation, it's just horrible." The parking lot seemed to tilt beneath me. Vacation? Yes, his annual leave. He requested the full week last month. She continued talking, but I barely heard her. There was no summit in Phoenix, no presentation, no career-defining meeting. Evan had submitted a vacation request weeks earlier, booked a Florida resort, and constructed an entire business trip so carefully that I had driven him to the airport believing it. He had not made a sudden mistake. He had planned the lie. I gave Camille the church address and thanked her in a calm voice that sounded like someone else's.
Then I sat in my car with 200 memorial programs stacked beside me and opened my calendar. At 1:30 that afternoon, I walked into the office of family law attorney Renee Caldwell. Her office contained 2 things within easy reach of her desk: a box of tissues and a heavy steel document shredder. Compassion on one side, consequences on the other. I placed the call log, the resort statement, and a written timeline in front of her. Then I told her everything. Margaret collapsing at 6:27, the first call at 7:11, Melissa refusing to come, the woman answering at 2:06, Margaret dying at 2:49, Evan asking me to handle the arrangements. Renee listened without interrupting. When I finished, she lifted the page showing my calls. 32 attempts? Yes. And he was in Florida on a vacation arranged at least 3 weeks in advance? Yes. She folded her hands. Do you intend to stay married to him? No. It was the easiest answer I had given all week. Then listen carefully, she said. Do not confront him. Do not reveal what you know. Angry spouses give warnings. Warnings allow records to disappear. I preserve records for a living. I noticed. She glanced at my indexed folder. Once we file, financial restrictions take effect. He will not be allowed to empty joint accounts, sell shared property, or move assets without consequences. We will also document every marital dollar spent on the affair. The hotel, meals, and transfers? Everything. Courts call it dissipation of marital assets. I call it making someone repay the cost of their deception. For the first time since Margaret's death, I almost smiled. Renee slid a legal pad toward me. I need 3 years of bank statements, tax returns, credit cards, property records, phone bills, retirement accounts, and any unusual transfers. How soon? As soon as possible. I looked at the clock. It was 2:18 p.m. Tomorrow morning, I said. That evening, I signed the final authorization for Margaret's burial. Then I drove back to Renee's office and signed a petition to end my marriage. 2 sets of papers in one day. One closed the life of the woman who had loved me. The other closed the life I had built around her son. My hand remained perfectly steady through both. That night, I sat at Margaret's kitchen table with my laptop, 3 years of statements, and the pot of unfinished stew still sealed inside the refrigerator. I began with the obvious transactions. Florida was not the beginning. It was simply the first time Evan had become careless enough to put the entire story on our joint card. 7 months earlier, small transfers had started leaving our checking account. $350 in November, $500 in December, $725 in February, $900 in April. Each one went to the same external account, ending in 6,382. Each one carried a vague description: consulting, reimbursement, client expense, words designed to sound professional enough that no one would ask questions. I asked questions for a living. In March, there was a $1,640 charge from Bellamy Jewelers. I owned nothing new. For one humiliating moment, I still checked my jewelry box. I opened every drawer as though a necklace might somehow appear and rescue the explanation I had been building for him. There was no necklace, only the earrings Margaret had given me on my wedding day, and the thin gold bracelet Evan had bought when apologizing for missing my birthday. I sat on the bedroom floor until my legs stopped shaking. Then I returned to the records. A second mobile number had been added to our family account in January, $52.90 per month, unlimited data, no device listed under my name. Hotel charges appeared in cities Evan had claimed to visit for one night, but where the bills showed 2 breakfasts, late checkout, and valet parking through the following afternoon. A restaurant in Charleston had charged our card on the same evening he told me he was eating alone in the airport, a boutique in Savannah, a rental car in Tampa, flowers delivered to an address I did not recognize. The evidence spread across the table until the wood disappeared beneath it. Every time I found another transaction, an old memory changed shape. A canceled dinner, a delayed flight, a client emergency, a weekend when he said his phone had died. The lies had not been isolated incidents. They had been the structure holding our marriage together. By 2 a.m., I had created a complete index: bank accounts, credit cards, transfers to account 6,382, jewelry, second phone, hotels, Florida, call log. I placed each section behind a labeled divider inside a document box. The final tab read, Margaret. I stared at that word for a long time. The next morning, I carried the box into Renee Caldwell's office. She opened it, reviewed the index, and slowly turned through the first several sections. Then she looked at me over the top of her glasses. How long did this take you? Most of the night. In 24 years of practice, I have never received a cleaner financial disclosure from a client. I audit people who think no one will notice. Renee closed box. Your husband married the wrong woman. No, I said. He married the right woman for what he wanted. He just assumed I would stay that woman forever. At 9:42 that morning, while I was steaming wrinkles from the black dress I planned to wear to the funeral, my phone rang. The caller introduced himself as Arthur Whitmore, Margaret's attorney. His voice was careful and formal. Mrs. Bennett, I represented Margaret Hale for almost 30 years. I saw the notice this morning. I'm deeply sorry. Thank you.
I know the service is tomorrow, and I do not want to add more strain. But Margaret left very specific instructions. She wanted me to contact you immediately if anything happened to her. I stopped moving the steamer. Is there a problem? No, quite the opposite. But I believe you should know what she arranged before the funeral. Arthur's office smelled of leather, paper, and furniture polish. Margaret's file sat on his desk, thick enough to suggest she had planned for every possible version of the future. She replaced her previous will on February 21st, he said. She was fully competent, and because she anticipated objections, she requested a written medical capacity assessment the same week. He slid the document toward me. At the bottom, Margaret had written in her own hand, Arthur, make sure nobody says I was confused. I know exactly who everyone is. I laughed once before I could stop myself. It sounded too loud in the quiet office. That is very much her, I said. Yes, Arthur replied. It was. He opened the will. The house on Hawthorne Lane, including its contents, is left entirely to you. I did not understand the sentence at first. To me? To Nora Bennett, whom Margaret describes as the daughter who chose me even when my own children found me inconvenient. The words blurred. Arthur waited without filling the silence. Evan receives $30,000 and Robert's pocket watch. Melissa receives $30,000 and the antique cedar cabinet. He turned another page. The will also contains a no contest provision. Any beneficiary who challenges it forfeits their inheritance. Why did she change it in February? Arthur looked at me for several seconds. Then he removed a sealed envelope from the file. My name was written across the front in Margaret's uneven handwriting. She asked me to give you this only after her death, he said, and only when you were somewhere safe enough to read it.
I opened the envelope in Arthur's office. Waiting until I got home was impossible. Inside was a 3-page letter written in Margaret's familiar slanted handwriting. Nora, I saw Evan with her last September. They were outside a cafe near Lake Mercer. His hand was resting against the small of her back, and she was wearing the green scarf he told me he bought for a client. He did not see me. Evan has always been very good at looking toward whatever he wants, and very bad at seeing what is directly in front of him. I considered telling you. Then I imagined what you would do. You would ask him calmly. He would cry, explain, promise, and blame work. You would stay because you would worry about me being alone. You would try to repair him because you repair everything. So I chose not to make you responsible for one more difficult thing. Instead, I changed my paperwork.
I know that may make you angry. You are allowed to be angry with me. But I needed to make sure that when you finally stopped carrying my son, you had somewhere safe to set him down. This house has heard more truth from you than it ever heard from either of my children. You have cared for it, cared for me, and cared for a marriage Evan treated like hotel housekeeping. Do not remain with him for my sake. Not after I am gone. Especially not after I am gone. Take the house. Keep the garden. Throw out that terrible yellow chair if you want, though I know you secretly like it. And please remember this. Being loyal to someone who keeps hurting you is not kindness. Sometimes it is only fear wearing good manners. Love, Mom. I read the letter twice, then I placed it carefully on Arthur's desk and cried. Not because Evan had betrayed me. By then, the betrayal had already become paperwork. I cried because Margaret had known for months and had spent those months quietly building a bridge for me without ever asking whether she would live long enough to watch me cross it. Arthur handed me a tissue and looked away. She was worried you would stay because of her, he said. She was right. She usually was. I sat in my car afterward with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine off. Margaret had known exactly who her son was. Still, while dying, she had looked toward the doorway and asked for him. That was motherhood, I suppose.
The ability to see someone clearly and continue hoping they might become better before it was too late. Evan had spent his entire life depending on that hope. I drove back to our house and finished preparing the black dress. At 7:16 that evening, Evan sent another message. Finally got a flight, landing Sunday at 9:05 p.m. This has been the worst week of my life. His mother's funeral was Saturday morning. He knew the date. He had the church address. He simply planned to arrive after everything difficult had already been handled. I studied the message and calculated the time. Approximately 46 hours until he returned. One funeral, one meeting with the estate lawyer, one final night inside the house we had shared, and not one word from me about Florida, the second phone, the jewelry, or the divorce petition already filed in my name. Saturday morning, the church was full. Margaret's garden club filled 3 rows. Women from her book group stood near the entrance arranging flowers. Her pharmacist came with his wife. 2 former neighbors drove almost 4 hours to attend. The front pew held me, an empty place for Evan, and another empty place where Melissa should have been. Everyone noticed. An empty chair at a funeral makes more noise than any speech. Melissa arrived 13 minutes late, wearing dark glasses and crying loudly enough for people near the back to turn around. She moved down the aisle, clutching hands and repeating the same sentence. Evan is devastated. He tried everything, but the airlines are impossible. He had tried everything except changing a reservation. When it was time for the eulogy, I stood behind the lectern and looked at the people who had shown up for Margaret. I spoke about her roses, her terrible television opinions, the biscuits she made without measuring, the way she could turn an insult into something that sounded almost polite. Then I said, Margaret believed that love should be written into actions, and when actions might fail, she believed in paperwork. A ripple of laughter moved through the church. The people who knew her understood. I never mentioned Evan. I did not need to. His empty chair said everything for me.
At the cemetery, the wind moved gently through the trees while the pastors spoke about memory, faith, and returning to the earth. My phone vibrated inside my coat. I looked down. Evan had sent a message. Tell everyone I'm completely broken. Make sure they know I wanted to be there. Even his grief had become something for me to manage. I locked the screen and stepped forward when the pastor finished. I placed one white lily on Margaret's coffin and leaned close enough that no one else could hear. I'll handle everything, Mom, I whispered. But this is the last time I handle it for him. At the reception, Margaret's oldest friend, June Holloway, found me near the kitchen. June was a small woman with bright silver hair and the posture of someone who had never allowed age to interrupt her plans. She took both of my hands. Margaret called you the daughter she waited her whole life for, she said. I hope she told you that. She did. Good. Her eyes stayed on mine for a long moment. And I hope you understand that leaving her son does not mean leaving her. My throat tightened. You knew? Margaret told me enough. June squeezed my fingers once. Do what you need to do. Sunday morning, the doorbell rang at 8:52. Melissa stood on the porch wearing no sunglasses this time. I need Mom's emerald ring, she said before greeting me. Evan says I should keep it safe until the estate is settled. Nothing leaves the house. Her expression sharpened. Excuse me? Arthur Whitmore instructed me not to remove or distribute any of Margaret's belongings until the will is formally processed. Arthur Whitmore? Yes, her attorney. Melissa gave a short laugh. You're not seriously trying to control her property. You're not even her real daughter. I felt something inside me become very still. Margaret decided what I was to her. This family is grieving, Nora. You don't get to hide behind legal documents and act superior. Where was Evan? The question stopped her. What? While his mother was dying, where was he? Her eyes shifted toward the driveway. He was working. No, he wasn't. I don't know what you think you know. He was in Key Largo. Silence. A lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically across the street. Melissa folded her arms. He needed time away. You two have been having problems for months. You knew? It wasn't my responsibility to interfere in your marriage. You knew where he was when I called you from the ICU. Her face tightened. Evan works constantly. He deserved a break. You have no idea how much pressure he's under. His mother was dying.
And what was he supposed to do? Fly back and magically fix it? He was supposed to answer the phone. Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. I stepped back into the house. Nothing leaves until the estate is settled. You can't shut me out of my own mother's home. I closed the door gently. No shouting, no dramatic final sentence, just the quiet click of the lock. A slammed door is an argument. A softly closed one is a decision. For several minutes, I stood in the hallway shaking. My mind was calm, but my body had apparently kept its own record of the week. When the shaking passed, I checked the time. 9:14 a.m. Evan's flight landed at 9:05 that evening, less than 12 hours. For one brief, reckless moment, I imagined meeting him at the airport. I imagined holding enlarged copies of the resort charges above my head. I imagined reading every transaction aloud while strangers filmed his expression. The idea was satisfying. It was also useless. Public humiliation would give him a scene in which he could become the victim. Paper would give him nowhere to hide. I returned to our house and packed the final suitcase. Then, by force of habit, I took Evan's black suit from the closet and began ironing the collar. I stopped after the first sleeve. There I was, preparing a funeral suit for a funeral he had already skipped. 9 years of marriage had trained my hands to take care of him even after my mind had finished. I unplugged the iron. I hung the suit at the back of the closet. For whoever you pretend to be next, I said to the empty room. Then I cleaned the house. Every counter, every shelf, every room. I did not want to leave behind one object he could use to claim I had acted impulsively. At 4:07 p.m., I arranged the kitchen table. Margaret's memorial program went in the center, exactly where Evan always dropped his keys. Beside it, I placed the resort statement. I highlighted one charge. Not the room, not the sailing trip, the champagne. He would understand why. Beside the statement, I placed the divorce petition. My signature was already dry. Finally, I removed my wedding ring. It resisted at the knuckle before sliding free. I set it on the blank line waiting for his name. Then I took my suitcase, switched off my phone, and left. Evan returned that night to an empty house. I returned to the blue house on Hawthorne Lane. The house Margaret had already made mine. Monday morning at 9:20, a process server named Daniel Reeves entered the lobby of Evan's company headquarters. Renee had chosen the location deliberately. People control themselves in office lobbies, she told me, and witnesses remember. Daniel handed Evan the petition for dissolution of marriage in front of the receptionist, 2 members of his sales team, and the vice president who had approved his vacation request. By then, I was sitting at Margaret's kitchen table drinking coffee from her chipped blue mug. I did not see his face. I did not need to. I turned my phone on Tuesday morning. There were 51 missed calls, 74 messages. The first few were confused. Where are you? What is this? Why is there divorce paperwork on the table? Then came anger. You had no right to go through our accounts. You're making me look like a monster. This is completely insane. After anger came bargaining. We can fix this. Lacey meant nothing. It was one bad week. Then fear. Please call me. I'm going to lose everything.
You can't take Mom's house. Finally, blame. You should have told me how serious it was. I read that message 3 times. Then I opened the folder containing the call log. 32 calls. 32 opportunities to answer. I replied to none of them. Renee answered for me through formal letters. The financial investigation moved quickly because Evan had never expected anyone to examine his life closely. The Florida trip totaled $4,487. Transfers to account, $6,382, totaled $5,225. The jewelry purchase was $1,640. The second phone line, hotels, flowers, meals, and rental cars added another $2,980. Documented marital funds spent on the affair, $14,332. Every dollar was deducted from Evan's share of the property settlement. He also paid part of my legal fees after failing to disclose the second phone and 2 transfers during the first financial filing. Renee called it noncompliance. I called it habit. Lying had worked for him so often that he continued, even when the truth was already arranged in labeled folders. 3 weeks after filing, Renee forwarded me a letter from Evan's attorney. He intended to challenge Margaret's will. The letter claimed I had influenced her while she was vulnerable and isolated her from her children. I read that sentence in the house where Melissa visited twice a year, and Evan arrived only when something needed repairing.
Arthur Whitmore's response was 4 pages long. He attached Margaret's medical capacity assessment, the signed witness statements, the no contest clause, and a record of every independent meeting he had held with her. His final paragraph was the most elegant threat I had ever read. Mr. Hale is entitled to contest the will. He should understand, however, that an unsuccessful challenge will reduce his inheritance from $30,000 to $0. The challenge disappeared 6 days later. Evan accepted the money and Robert's pocket watch. 2 months after that, June sent me a screenshot from an online auction site. The watch was listed for $750. Vintage men's timepiece, family item, priced to sell. He sold his father's watch before Margaret's grave had settled. For some reason, that hurt more than the hotel. An affair can be blamed on desire, selfishness, weakness, or fantasy. Selling the watch was simpler. It showed that memory itself had no value to him unless someone else would pay for it. Our mediation took place in a conference room on the 4th floor of the courthouse annex. The mediator was a retired judge named Evelyn Mercer, a woman with white hair and the expression of someone who had listened to every excuse at least twice. Evan sat across from me wearing a navy suit and the tan he had brought home from Florida. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just less convincing. Without the house, the marriage, and the women who had always cleaned up around him, there was not much left supporting the performance. Judge Mercer reviewed the financial summary in silence. Then she removed her glasses. Mr. Hale, the proposed settlement is reasonable, she said. Given the documentation, refusing it would be expensive. His lawyer leaned toward him and whispered. Evan stared at the table. For the first time in our marriage, no charm, apology, or carefully injured expression could change the numbers. He signed. When the papers had been gathered, he finally looked at me. You could have tried harder to reach me, he said. You knew Mom needed me. The room went completely still. Renee opened our evidence binder and slid 1 page across the table. Exhibit D, 32 outgoing calls from 7:11 p.m. until 2:06 a.m. The final call connected 43 minutes before Margaret died. I did try, I said quietly. 32 times. Evan stared at the timestamps. He had no answer. For once, silence belonged to him.
2 days after the mediation, I received a message from a woman named Lacey Morgan. Her profile picture showed the same green scarf Margaret had mentioned in her letter. For several minutes, I stared at the notification without opening it. Then I reminded myself that information is neither kind nor cruel. It is simply useful. I read the message. Nora, I know you probably hate me, and I understand why. Evan told me he had been separated for almost a year. He said you still shared the house because selling it would affect your taxes. I believed him. I didn't know his mother was in the hospital. That night, he told me the calls were from work and that you always panicked when he traveled. After we came home, he said Margaret died suddenly on Sunday. Then I found the obituary and saw that she died Thursday morning and that the funeral was Saturday. I am sorry. I should have asked more questions. I believed some of it, not all of it. Lacey had known enough to whisper when answering his phone. She had known enough never to post photographs showing his face. She had known enough to accept jewelry, private trips, and hotel rooms while supposedly dating a separated man who never spent holidays with her. But she had not known about Margaret. The truth of that was visible in the message. I replied once. You heard my calls. You heard him silence them. Whatever he told you afterward, you knew someone needed him. She did not answer. 11 days later, she removed every photograph of him from her account. Evan called Renee's office soon afterward and accused me of contacting Lacey to destroy their relationship. I had not contacted her. I had not needed to.
Watching a man ignore 32 calls while his mother was dying had eventually done what honesty should have done much earlier. The rest of his life began shrinking quietly. There was no dramatic public scandal, no video posted online, no newspaper headline. Consequences rarely arrive with music. They arrive as invitations that stop coming. At Corvell Surgical, Camille learned there had never been a conference in Phoenix. Evan had used company contacts and fake meeting details to support his story at home. His affair was not the company's concern, but falsifying travel explanations involving clients was. He kept his job, but the promotion disappeared. His district manager assigned the new hospital account to someone else. The sales team stopped inviting him for drinks after work. Nothing official, nothing he could appeal, just doors that no longer opened as easily. Melissa experienced a different kind of consequence. At Margaret's memorial garden meeting, she arrived expecting to help select a plaque. June Holloway informed her that the plaque had already been ordered. When Melissa complained, June smiled politely. Those who attended the funeral made the arrangements. No one insulted her, no one raised a voice. The women simply moved their chairs closer together and continued the meeting without making space. In Margaret's world, that was a complete sentence. Melissa later sent me a 4-page email accusing me of turning the town against her. I forwarded it to Renee without replying. Renee wrote back, "You are not responsible for the natural consequences of accurate information." I printed that sentence and placed it inside Margaret's recipe box. The divorce became final 5 months after the mediation. The judge asked whether the marriage was irretrievably broken. "Yes," I said.
Evan answered after a pause. Yes. That was the last word we spoke to each other in the same room. Outside the courthouse, he tried to follow me toward the parking garage. Nora. I kept walking. Can we at least talk like adults? I stopped beside the elevator but did not turn around. We had 9 years to talk. I made mistakes. You made plans. That's not fair. I finally looked at him. His face still carried the expectation that if he found the right expression, I would help him escape the consequences of his own choices. Fair was 32 chances to answer, I said. You used every one of them. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. This time, when the doors closed softly between us, my hands did not shake.
I moved into Margaret's house permanently the week after the divorce was finalized. At first, I changed almost nothing. Her coat remained on the hook beside the back door. Robert's old gardening gloves stayed beneath the sink. The yellow chair she had joked about in her letter remained beside the window because she had been right. I did secretly like it. The house did not feel abandoned. It felt paused. Every room carried proof that someone had once paid attention there. Margaret labeled leftovers with dates. She kept spare batteries in a jar marked batteries that work, and dead ones in another marked liars. Her recipes included instructions such as stop stirring before you ruin it, and more garlic than Evan likes. I found that last one 3 weeks after moving in and laughed so suddenly that I frightened myself. Grief had strange timing. Sometimes I could speak about her funeral without crying, then lose an entire afternoon because I found one of her grocery lists written on the back of an envelope. June visited every Tuesday at 4, carrying food I had not requested. She would place a casserole in the refrigerator, inspect the garden through the kitchen window, and deliver whatever information the town had collected that week. Evan had rented an apartment near the highway. Melissa had stopped attending garden club events. Lacey had moved to another state. Corvell Surgical had promoted a younger employee to the position Evan once considered guaranteed. June never sounded pleased by any of it. She simply reported facts. Margaret would have appreciated the distinction. One afternoon, Arthur Whitmore arrived with the final estate documents. He sat at the kitchen table and placed Robert's old fountain pen beside the signature pages. Margaret signed her will with this, he said. I thought you might like to use it. The pen scratched slightly across the paper. When I finished, Arthur gathered the documents but left the pen in front of me. She wanted you protected, he said. But I believe she also wanted you to understand something. What? That the house was not a reward for surviving Evan. It was recognition of a life you had already built here. I looked around the kitchen. The clock above the stove ticked too loudly. Margaret had once promised to replace it, then complained that quiet clocks lacked personality. I spent years thinking I was visiting her, I said. Arthur smiled.
I think she believed you were coming home. After he left, I walked through every room. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine the house as mine, rather than something Margaret might return to claim. I moved my books into the living room, I placed my clothes in the upstairs wardrobe, I brought the chipped blue mug from the kitchen table to my desk and used it every morning. Still, some things remained untouched. The unfinished stew had stayed in the freezer since the night Margaret collapsed. I had transferred it there after the funeral because throwing it away felt impossible. 5 months later, I finally took the container out. I stood over the sink with the lid in my hand. The stew had become a dark frozen block, no longer food, no longer anything that could be saved. I expected the moment to feel important. Instead, it felt ordinary. I let hot water run over the container until the edges loosened, emptied it into the trash, washed the pot, and placed it back in the cupboard. Then I opened Margaret's recipe box. Her chicken stew card was near the front. The ingredients were listed in careful handwriting, but the final instruction ran diagonally across the bottom. Taste before adding salt. People and soup both reveal themselves eventually. The following Wednesday, I bought fresh vegetables. I used the same pot, I chopped the carrots at the same counter where she had collapsed. For a moment, the memory returned so sharply that I had to grip the edge of the sink. Then I kept going. The stew simmered while rain tapped against the window. The same sound, a different night. When it was ready, June arrived without knocking. She tasted one spoonful, considered it seriously, and added pepper. Margaret would have added too much salt, she said. She would have denied it? Absolutely. We ate at the kitchen table. For the first time since Margaret died, the room held conversation instead of evidence. Later that night, an unfamiliar number called my phone. I knew it was Evan before the second ring. He had started using new numbers after Renee sent a formal request that he stop contacting me directly. I watched the screen glow. The old version of me would have answered. She would have worried that something had happened. She would have believed ignoring a call was cruel, regardless of what the caller had done. I turned the phone face down. The ringing continued. Once, twice, then silence. I felt no satisfaction, only peace. That was how I knew I had finally left him.
6 months after the divorce, Renee invited me to lunch. She arrived carrying a thin folder and placed it beside her plate. What's that? I asked. The final accounting. I thought everything was finished. Legally, yes. Financially, almost. She opened the folder. During the divorce proceedings, Evan had claimed that several transfers to account 6,382 were legitimate reimbursements connected to work. Renee had requested documentation from Cordell Surgical, and the company's finance department had confirmed that no such reimbursements existed. The account belonged to Lacey. Evan had paid her rent twice. He had also covered a car repair, a weekend training course, and the deposit on an apartment she apparently planned to move into after he left me. The final amount of marital money spent on the affair rose to $17,806. Because he had concealed part of it during disclosure, the court ordered him to reimburse my share and pay an additional portion of Renee's fees. He appealed? I asked. He threatened to. And Renee smiled. I sent his lawyer the spreadsheet. That ended it. There was something almost comforting about the simplicity. For months, Evan had treated every lie as though it existed only until the next conversation. If questioned, he would explain it differently. If challenged, he would become offended. If cornered, he would accuse the other person of misunderstanding. But a spreadsheet does not care whether someone feels misunderstood. It places every number in its proper column and waits. After lunch, I deposited the final check into an account held only in my name. I did not celebrate. The money was not a victory. It was simply mine, returned after being used to finance someone else's fantasy. That evening, I found a package on Margaret's porch. There was no return address. Inside was Robert's pocket watch. For several seconds, I could only stare at it. The auction listing had disappeared weeks earlier, and I assumed a stranger had bought it. A folded note lay beneath the watch. Nora, I purchased this from the online sale. Robert gave it to Evan on his 18th birthday and told him that a man should know the value of time before wasting other people's. Margaret told me that story more than once. The watch belongs in the house, even if the son did not understand why. Arthur. I sat on the porch steps with the watch in my palm. The metal was scratched near the clasp. Robert's initials were engraved on the back, along with a date from 40 years earlier. Time had not made Evan better. It had only given him more opportunities to reveal himself. I carried the watch inside and placed it in the drawer beneath Margaret's recipe box. Not because Evan deserved to have it preserved. Because Margaret and Robert deserved to have something of theirs remain where it had been loved. A week later, Evan appeared at the end of the drive.
I was cutting dead branches from the rose bushes when I saw him leaning against a silver rental car. He did not approach the porch. Perhaps the letter from Renee had finally taught him that crossing boundaries created documentation. "You look good," he called. I set the pruning shears down but stayed beside the roses. "What do you need?" "I wanted to see the house." "It isn't yours. I grew up here. And then you sold everything from that life you could put a price on." His jaw tightened. "I made bad decisions." "You made the same decision repeatedly." He looked toward the upstairs windows. "Is Dad's watch really gone?" I studied him. He did not ask about his mother's letters, photographs, garden, or recipes. Only the item he had already sold. "The person who bought it returned it to the house." Relief moved across his face. "Good, then I should have it back." "No." "Nora, it belonged to my father. He left it to you, and you sold it. I needed money. You received $30,000. That disappeared fast." There it was. The clearest statement he had ever made. Money disappeared. People waited. Women handled things. Mothers forgave. Until one day they did not. "The watch stays here," I said. "You've taken everything from me." I almost laughed, but the sadness in the sentence stopped me. He truly believed that. He could not see the years of chances, the calls, the inheritance, the settlement, or the people who had once loved him. He saw only the consequences and called them theft. "No, Evan," I said. "You spent everything." He stood there for another moment, waiting for the woman who used to rescue him to appear. She did not. I picked up the pruning shears. He returned to the car and drove away. The roses needed cutting. Margaret had taught me that removing what was dead did not harm the plant. It gave the living parts room to grow. It has been almost a year since Margaret died. The blue house on Hawthorne Lane no longer feels paused. It feels lived in again. I repainted the upstairs bedroom, repaired the loose porch step, and planted herbs beside the kitchen window. I kept the yellow chair, the loud clock, and Margaret's handwritten labels on the pantry shelves. The jar marked "batteries that work" is still there. So is the jar marked "liars." June says I should combine them because half the batteries have probably changed categories by now. I told her some labels remain accurate forever. Every Wednesday, we cook dinner together. Sometimes Arthur joins us. Sometimes Teresa Alvarez, the nurse from Westbridge Memorial, stops by after her shift. She came once to return a scarf I had left in Margaret's hospital room, and somehow became part of the small family that formed afterward. None of us are related. Margaret would have said that proves paperwork is not the only way to make something official. The garden recovered in spring. Her roses came back first, then the herbs, then the tomato plant she had started from seeds stored in carefully folded envelopes. On the first warm Saturday, June and I planted all of them along the back fence. I used Margaret's old gardening gloves. They were too small, but I wore them anyway. By midsummer, the vines had grown taller than the wooden stakes. I picked the first ripe tomato and ate it standing in the yard, warm from the sun.
For 1 second, I expected to hear Margaret accuse me of stealing produce before dinner. The silence hurt. Then it softened. That is what grief does eventually. It does not leave. It simply stops demanding the entire room. Evan still calls occasionally, never from the same number twice. Sometimes he leaves messages. He says he has changed. He says losing everything taught him what matters. He says he understands now. The messages are always about what happened to him. His apartment, his career, his loneliness, his regret.
He has never once mentioned the 32 calls without explaining why he did not answer them. Bad timing, too much alcohol, Lacey had taken his phone, he thought I was overreacting, he did not understand how serious the situation was. Every explanation is another attempt to edit the timeline, but the timeline does not need his cooperation. At 6:27 p.m., Margaret collapsed. At 7:11, I made the first call. At 2:06, a woman answered. At 2:49, Margaret died holding my hand. Those facts do not change because he finally dislikes what they say about him. Last month, an unfamiliar envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Evan had written, "I know saying sorry is not enough. Tell me what would be." I placed the letter in the drawer with the divorce records. I did not answer because there was no task left for me to give him. Some things cannot be repaired. Some apologies are not doors. They are simply acknowledgments that a door exists and has already closed. On the anniversary of Margaret's death, I made her chicken stew. I began at 6:27 in the evening. Not because I wanted to repeat the worst night of my life, but because I wanted that hour to belong to something else. June chopped the carrots. Arthur brought bread. Teresa arrived with white lilies and placed them in a glass jar beside Margaret's photograph. We ate at the kitchen table while the loud clock ticked above us. After dinner, I took Robert's pocket watch from the drawer. Arthur had repaired the clasp, and it worked again. I wound it carefully and placed it beside Margaret's recipe box. 2 different clocks began marking time in the kitchen, one loud, one quiet, both moving forward. Later, after everyone had gone home, my phone rang. Unknown number. I turned it over and watched the screen glow against the dark table. Once, I would have answered because I believed love meant always being available. Margaret taught me otherwise. Love is showing up when it matters. Love is listening before answering. Love is making choices that protect someone even when you are not there to see the result. And sometimes, love, especially love for yourself, is allowing a call to go unanswered. The phone kept ringing. I opened Margaret's recipe box and found the card for apple pie. At the bottom, beneath the ingredients, she had written, "Cold butter, colder hands, never apologize to the dough." I smiled. Then I placed my phone face down and began measuring flour. The ringing stopped on its own. This time, I did not count how many times he called. I no longer needed the evidence.